Việt Nam là quốc gia tiên phong trong khu vực trong việc áp dụng chuẩn nghèo đa chiều làm công cụ xác định mục tiêu, theo dõi tình hình nghèo đói và xây dựng chính sách. Tỷ lệ nghèo đa chiều đã giảm từ 8,23% trong năm 2016 xuống 3,72% vào năm 2019. Tuy nhiên, vẫn còn nhiều chênh lệch. Tình trạng nghèo về thu nhập tạm thời tăng trong thời kỳ Covid-19 và phổ biến hơn ở các nhóm dân di cư và dân tộc thiểu số. Năm 2021, với sự hỗ trợ của Undp, Chính phủ ban hành chuẩn nghèo đa chiều mới. Theo đó, tỷ lệ hộ nghèo và cận nghèo tăng từ 5,2% năm 2020 lên 9,35% năm 2021. Đồng nghĩa với thêm 10 triệu người được hưởng lợi từ các chính sách và chương trình mục tiêu của Chính phủ về bảo trợ xã hội và giảm nghèo. Để giúp Chính phủ và các đối tác phát triển có được những chính sách và hỗ trợ cần thiết nhằm đẩy nhanh giảm nghèo đa chiều, Undp phối hợp với Bộ Lao động Thương binh và Xã hội, Ủy ban Dân tộc và Tổng cục Thống kê với sự hỗ trợ của DFAT xây dựng và công bố báo cáo cập nhật về tiến độ của Việt Nam trong giảm nghèo ở mọi khía cạnh. Báo cáo phân tích các yếu tố quan trọng giúp Việt Nam đạt được tiến bộ trong giảm nghèo đa chiều, những thách thức lớn và những rào cản như bất bình đẳng trong tiếp cận công nghệ và thiết bị, chênh lệch trong khả năng tiếp cận các dịch vụ xã hội, đặc biệt là y tế và giáo dục, phạm vi hạn chế của các chương trình hỗ trợ xã hội. Từ đó, báo cáo đưa ra các khuyến nghị về việc làm năng suất cao, chất lượng các dịch vụ xã hội, mở rộng và củng cố hệ thống bảo trợ xã hội và thúc đẩy các giải pháp sáng tạo, chuyển đổi số để tăng tốc giảm nghèo đa chiều. Không để ai bị bỏ lại phía sau. Việt Nam là quốc gia tiên phong trong khu vực trong việc áp dụng chuẩn nghèo đa chiều làm công cụ xác định mục tiêu, theo dõi tình hình nghèo đói và xây dựng chính sách. Tỷ lệ nghèo đa chiều đã giảm từ 8,23% trong năm 2016 xuống 3,72% vào năm 2019. Tuy nhiên, vẫn còn nhiều chênh lệch. Tình trạng nghèo về thu nhập tạm thời tăng trong thời kỳ Covid-19 và phổ biến hơn ở các nhóm dân di cư và dân tộc thiểu số. Năm 2021, với sự hỗ trợ của Undp, Chính phủ ban hành chuẩn nghèo đa chiều mới. Theo đó, tỷ lệ hộ nghèo và cận nghèo tăng từ 5,2% năm 2020 lên 9,35% năm 2021. Đồng nghĩa với thêm 10 triệu người được hưởng lợi từ các chính sách và chương trình mục tiêu của Chính phủ về bảo trợ xã hội và giảm nghèo. Để giúp Chính phủ và các đối tác phát triển có được những chính sách và hỗ trợ cần thiết nhằm đẩy nhanh giảm nghèo đa chiều, Undp phối hợp với Bộ Lao động Thương binh và Xã hội, Ủy ban Dân tộc và Tổng cục Thống kê với sự hỗ trợ của DFAT xây dựng và công bố báo cáo cập nhật về tiến độ của Việt Nam trong giảm nghèo ở mọi khía cạnh. Báo cáo phân tích các yếu tố quan trọng giúp Việt Nam đạt được tiến bộ trong giảm nghèo đa chiều, những thách thức lớn và những rào cản như bất bình đẳng trong tiếp cận công nghệ và thiết bị, chênh lệch trong khả năng tiếp cận các dịch vụ xã hội, đặc biệt là y tế và giáo dục, phạm vi hạn chế của các chương trình hỗ trợ xã hội. Từ đó, báo cáo đưa ra các khuyến nghị về việc làm năng suất cao, chất lượng các dịch vụ xã hội, mở rộng và củng cố hệ thống bảo trợ xã hội và thúc đẩy các giải pháp sáng tạo, chuyển đổi số để tăng tốc giảm nghèo đa chiều. Không để ai bị bỏ lại phía sau. Việt Nam là quốc gia tiên phong trong khu vực trong việc áp dụng chuẩn nghèo đa chiều làm công cụ xác định mục tiêu, theo dõi tình hình nghèo đói và xây dựng chính sách. Tỷ lệ nghèo đa chiều đã giảm từ 8,23% trong năm 2016 xuống 3,72% vào năm 2019. Tuy nhiên, vẫn còn nhiều chênh lệch. Tình trạng nghèo về thu nhập tạm thời tăng trong thời kỳ Covid-19 và phổ biến hơn ở các nhóm dân di cư và dân tộc thiểu số. Năm 2021, với sự hỗ trợ của Undp, Chính phủ ban hành chuẩn nghèo đa chiều mới. Theo đó, tỷ lệ hộ nghèo và cận nghèo tăng từ 5,2% năm 2020 lên 9,35% năm 2021. Đồng nghĩa với thêm 10 triệu người được hưởng lợi từ các chính sách và chương trình mục tiêu của chính phủ về bảo trợ xã hội và giảm nghèo. Để giúp chính phủ và các đối tác phát triển có được những chính sách và hỗ trợ cần thiết nhằm đẩy nhanh giảm nghèo đa chiều, Undp phối hợp với Bộ Lao động Thương binh và Xã hội, Ủy ban Dân tộc và Tổng cục Thống kê với sự hỗ trợ của Deprivation xây dựng và công bố báo cáo cập nhật về tiến độ của Việt Nam trong giảm nghèo ở mọi khía cạnh. Báo cáo phân tích các yếu tố quan trọng giúp Việt Nam đạt được tiến bộ trong giảm nghèo đa chiều, những thách thức lớn và những rào cản như bất bình đẳng trong tiếp cận công nghệ và thiết bị, chênh lệch trong khả năng tiếp cận các dịch vụ xã hội, đặc biệt là y tế và giáo dục, phạm vi hạn chế của các chương trình hỗ trợ xã hội. Từ đó, báo cáo đưa ra các khuyến nghị về việc làm năng suất cao, chất lượng các dịch vụ xã hội, mở rộng và củng cố hệ thống bảo trợ xã hội và thúc đẩy các giải pháp sáng tạo, chuyển đổi số để tăng tốc giảm nghèo đa chiều. Không để ai bị bỏ lại phía sau. Việt Nam là quốc gia tiên phong trong khu vực trong việc áp dụng chuẩn nghèo đa chiều làm công cụ xác định mục tiêu, theo dõi tình hình nghèo đói và xây dựng chính sách. Tỷ lệ nghèo đa chiều đã giảm từ 8,23% trong năm 2016 xuống 3,72% vào năm 2019. Tuy nhiên, vẫn còn nhiều chênh lệch. Tình trạng nghèo về thu nhập tạm thời tăng trong thời kỳ Covid-19 và phổ biến hơn ở các nhóm dân di cư và dân tộc thiểu số. Năm 2021, với sự hỗ trợ của Undp, Chính phủ ban hành chuẩn nghèo đa chiều mới. Theo đó, tỷ lệ hộ nghèo và cận nghèo tăng từ 5,2% năm 2020 lên 9,35% năm 2021. Đồng nghĩa với thêm 10 triệu người được hưởng lợi từ các chính sách và chương trình mục tiêu của chính phủ về bảo trợ xã hội và giảm nghèo. Để giúp chính phủ và các đối tác phát triển có được những chính sách và hỗ trợ cần thiết nhằm đẩy nhanh giảm nghèo đa chiều, Undp phối hợp với Bộ Lao động Thương binh và Xã hội, Ủy ban Dân tộc và Tổng cục Thống kê với sự hỗ trợ của Deprivation xây dựng và công bố báo cáo cập nhật về tiến độ của Việt Nam trong giảm nghèo ở mọi khía cạnh. Báo cáo phân tích các yếu tố quan trọng giúp Việt Nam đạt được tiến bộ trong giảm nghèo đa chiều, những thách thức lớn và những rào cản như bất bình đẳng trong tiếp cận công nghệ và thiết bị, chênh lệch trong khả năng tiếp cận các dịch vụ xã hội, đặc biệt là y tế và giáo dục, phạm vi hạn chế của các chương trình hỗ trợ xã hội. Từ đó, báo cáo đưa ra các khuyến nghị về việc làm năng suất cao, chất lượng các dịch vụ xã hội, mở rộng và củng cố hệ thống bảo trợ xã hội và thúc đẩy các giải pháp sáng tạo, chuyển đổi số để tăng tốc giảm nghèo đa chiều. Không để ai bị bỏ lại phía sau. Việt Nam là quốc gia tiên phong trong khu vực trong việc áp dụng chuẩn nghèo đa chiều làm công cụ xác định mục tiêu, theo dõi tình hình nghèo đói và xây dựng chính sách. Tỷ lệ nghèo đa chiều đã giảm từ 8,23% trong năm 2016 xuống 3,72% vào năm 2019. Tuy nhiên, vẫn còn nhiều chênh lệch. Tình trạng nghèo về thu nhập tạm thời tăng trong thời kỳ Covid-19 và phổ biến hơn ở các nhóm dân di cư và dân tộc thiểu số. Năm 2021, với sự hỗ trợ của Undp, Chính phủ ban hành chuẩn nghèo đa chiều mới. Theo đó, tỷ lệ hộ nghèo và cận nghèo tăng từ 5,2% năm 2020 lên 9,35% năm 2021. Đồng nghĩa với thêm 10 triệu người được hưởng lợi từ các chính sách và chương trình mục tiêu của chính phủ về bảo trợ xã hội và giảm nghèo. Để giúp chính phủ và các đối tác phát triển có được những chính sách và hỗ trợ cần thiết nhằm đẩy nhanh giảm nghèo đa chiều, Undp phối hợp với Bộ Lao động Thương binh và Xã hội, Ủy ban Dân tộc và Tổng cục Thống kê với sự hỗ trợ của DFAT xây dựng và công bố báo cáo cập nhật về tiến độ của Việt Nam trong giảm nghèo ở mọi khía cạnh. Báo cáo phân tích các yếu tố quan trọng giúp Việt Nam đạt được tiến bộ trong giảm nghèo đa chiều, những thách thức lớn và những rào cản như bất bình đẳng trong tiếp cận công nghệ và thiết bị, chênh lệch trong khả năng tiếp cận các dịch vụ xã hội, đặc biệt là y tế và giáo dục, phạm vi hạn chế của các chương trình hỗ trợ xã hội. Từ đó, báo cáo đưa ra các khuyến nghị về việc làm năng suất cao, chất lượng các dịch vụ xã hội, mở rộng và củng cố hệ thống bảo trợ xã hội và thúc đẩy các giải pháp sáng tạo, chuyển đổi số để tăng tốc giảm nghèo đa chiều. Không để ai bị bỏ lại phía sau.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those who are still outside the conference hall, we would like to invite you to proceed to the conference hall so that we can start our agenda. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Do Ly Thu Ngọc. I'm the assistant to the resident representative of UNDP Vietnam and head of the Inclusive Growth Unit of Vietnam. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to warmly welcome you, all of the participants, to our report launch here at the Melia Hotel, and I would like to say hello to all of the online participants. So first of all, let me introduce to you our co-chairs of the report launch today. First of all, Minister and Chairman of Remark, Mr. Ho A Leng. And I'd like to warmly welcome Mr. Nguyễn Bá Hoan, Vice Minister, Ministry of Labor and Violence and Social Affairs. And also, and warmly welcome Ms. Connie Wignaraja, UN Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Assistant Administrator and Regional Director of the Regional Bureau of Asia and the Pacific, in her visit to Vietnam. Along with Ms. Connie Wignaraja is Ms. Kathleen Wilson, Resident Representative of UNDP Vietnam. We would like to warmly welcome all of the representatives from the National Assembly, the Office of the Government, the different ministries, international organizations, and all of the colleagues from embassies who are present at our launch today for this multidimensional poverty report 2021 launch with UNDP. And first of all, let me express my sincere thanks to Mr. Nguyễn Thắng from the Vietnam Academy of Social Science, one of the authors of this report. And ladies and gentlemen, the launch today is a testimony to the long-established working relationship between UNDP, SEMA, Malaysia, and MPI, GSO. The topic of this report is sustaining rapid reduction of poverty in all dimensions and everywhere in Vietnam. And this is an important achievement in our roadmap to multidimensional and sustainable poverty reduction. And once again, let me welcome all of you to the report launch today. And now I would like to introduce to you Ms. Connie Wignaraja, a UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Assistant Administrator and Regional Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, to deliver her opening remark.
Good morning, Xin Chào. And let me first recognize Minister Len from SEMA and Vice Minister Hoan from Malaysia, also our distinguished ambassadors from Norway and Mexico, and all of the government representatives, the international and national development partners, and all colleagues participating both here in the room but also online. It is truly such a personal pleasure to be here this morning. I was saying to Caitlin that it is to this day, very exact day, that I first arrived in Hanoi to live and work here 20 years ago. So you cannot imagine what a pleasure it is to be back in this country. Let me say also that this launch of the multidimensional poverty report really is, I was very keen that this was one of my first engagements, because looking back in hindsight, we were much more limited in our thinking then. And it is with such pride that I see the richness and the movement forward of how in these 2 decades we have together as a community that cares deeply about tackling the most stubborn poverty, how far we've come. Now, the MDP report to me is an example of also a long-standing, very trusted partnership between the government of Vietnam and UNDP to address all dimensions of poverty, far beyond income. And I was saying to Minister Len that I have traveled to all of these regions in Vietnam and was always despairing of how tough it was to get to some of the most deepest pockets of poverty at the time. So I really want to, at the outset, congratulate this country for addressing something that many countries have yet to get on track with. So we must recognize the remarkable achievements and the direction forward and the progress made in the last couple of decades. This transformation, if we think about it, is a change in a generation. And many of our countries have not been able to get there yet. So we have much to learn from Vietnam, just as much as Vietnam continues to learn from everyone else. I think the government is very keenly aware that expenditure measures alone just do not provide a standard of living sense or a perception that people feel that their well-being, their health is at a level that moves beyond fundamental deprivations. I think all of the surveys, and this is across the world, when you ask people what do they feel most, they don't speak to income. They speak to a number of other issues. And this is for the first time I see a report, analysis, and now programs behind that. It's one thing to write a report and to launch a report. It's a very different thing to have the political commitment and the investment choices that go behind those findings. So again, deep courage that it takes and persistence that it takes to move in these lines. I was quite amazed, I have to say, when I was looking at the findings of the report, that the new MDP-driven poverty line moves the near poor and the poor household rate from about 6.5% to about 14 to 15% who are now under need for, because the line moves, and with that you're looking at approximately another 10 million people who should be benefiting from a number of these national programs. So just the fact of being able to state that and publicly accept that is quite something, because it means there's a cost attached to it. Now, I do want to say that in many countries we see this persistence of poverty. And we often say, well, it's evident, the data is there, why aren't countries and their partners doing something about it? Well, it costs a lot. This is the issue that we never talk about, the per capita costs of getting to the most remote edges of poverty in any country almost doubles or trebles the costs of usual public services and public programs. So it takes a lot to say this is a necessary investment. These are necessary public policy choices. It takes even more for partners to say, we will stick with it. And that is something I do want to say to our UN colleagues, our international partners, please stay with it. And this is where I'm deeply appreciative to countries like Norway that have said, we're going to stay with you through the course of this. It does not come easy, it does not come cheap, but the investment, the return on this investment is huge. And that is something I think that just not only for Vietnam, but for the rest of the world, if we can show that it is possible to do this with the right data, the right analytics, the right policy choices, and then the investment that follows behind it, I think this is going to be remarkable in terms of getting back on track with those SDGs. Now, I do want to say that something we had not seen as intensely 20 years back was how much climate plays a very immediate role. We had it at the back of our mind, but this type of intensity of natural disasters, climate conditions, this wasn't as evident. We are much more aware now of building back a resilience very differently to how we were trying to do it in the past. And a second area that we were also not very aware of is we were looking at different ways in which to extend education, training, learning, knowledge. And now we have digital tools. One of those small silver linings, if I might call it that, from what pushed us because of the COVID pandemic was to say we have to deliver some of this through digital means. That includes transferring income, cash, extending market services, not just knowledge, to communities that otherwise seemed very out of reach. So certainly for us in UNDP, this is a big part of getting through. Now, I have to say also that to have 3 ministries working so closely together and then bringing in UNDP in this area is also something that I want to really recognize and appreciate. In the past, these used to be single ministry endeavors, but when we use this term integration, it's not an easy term. It slips off our tongue as though we are all used to very naturally working in integrated ways. We are not. It is not our natural state of being. But here, in this room, through these programs, you are seeing national entities coming together, and by doing that, also disciplining us to come together and work in this common endeavor. So let me just highlight a few lessons that we have pushed forward now as recommendations with government and with our partners as I look at the analytics and this report that you have with you. First is that one of the best ways to really deeply really make a dent and even beyond a dent to move things forward is the creation of more and more productive jobs. Now again, this may seem something easy to say, but without macroeconomic stability, without the kind of trade integration that you see, without public and private sector investment in infrastructure, this cannot happen. So high productivity jobs does not just come because there is a policy statement on it, but there's a whole ecosystem that has to invest behind that. Now, in Vietnam, one of the issues that has to really be tackled in this respect is that Vietnamese firms, so let me be very specific, domestic firms would need to really take on much greener technologies if they're to compete at the same level in regional and global markets, opening up new products and new services, which are these areas of high productivity employment going forward. That means more domestic support to domestic private firms, because that shift is yet to happen. A few have broken through, but not as a whole ecosystem. And the second is that these pathways are available in capital cities and all the big cities in Vietnam, but not in these remote communities. So how do you incentivize firms to also reach out to communities that are not as evident in this journey? So that takes me to the second point, which is quality public services, social services that then raise the level of how communities can actually compete better in this market. Now there I would put the biggest effort and emphasis on education. And here again, both public education and education, adult education in market-based literacy is, to me, a big winner in this, and we were just discussing that also with the minister. Let me speak to the report gives a lot of space to the discussion of social protection. And I have to say here that what we see in most countries is a series of ad hoc efforts at social protection. Very few countries in our region have a standing social protection system. So we respond when there's a crisis with special measures. You've seen it during COVID. In fact, you see it also in many countries in the world, including in the North, a lot of special measures that came in as a result of crises. But I'm talking about investing in a standing social protection measure as an investment, not as a cost, because the return, again, on that investment is very high, and it takes out these ups and downs that people face in trying to deal, including with climatic shocks, let alone with pandemics. And that also means a regular flow of cash assistance to small businesses and to households when they need it. I have never found it an issue to provide a temporary basic income to folks when I always feel that people know what to do best with cash. We don't have to tell them what to do with cash. And in most parts of Asia, the majority of cash provided as basic income goes into investment in education and health. So again, a very high return. Fourth is what we said, the expanded use of digital services. And here, it's not just about service extension. It's amazing the amount of knowledge and exchange that happens, particularly for young people. And I think this is, for a lot of the younger generation, been a huge way out of poverty. And so again, this is part of the new program, is a heavy emphasis on how to move through digital services, including using digital as a measure and a way to which to track and measure progress. And finally to say, we've done, and again I look back 20 years, how many pilots? I think we've just got to stop now. We have enough pilots. We put aside the ones that didn't work, that's the whole idea of experimenting, and you take the ones that work and you've got to scale them up. And here, I think public investment is the first forerunner of scaling on successful efforts. And behind that, leveraging that and catalyzing that is both direct investment, domestic and foreign, but also the ODA that comes from those partners that provide grants to these efforts. So these are all, to me, opportunities we need to grasp and do it now. And that really puts a very concrete face on leaving no one behind. Otherwise, I tend to not use that phrase because I feel it's empty if we don't put the institutions, the policies, and the money behind that phrase. So let me say first, sincere thanks to our government partners. I don't think this would be possible to do without a political commitment and a financial and policy commitment that comes from SEMA, from Melissa, from MPI. So a deep thank you to them. To our partners, and particularly here, I want to thank Norway for the efforts in this regard. And I do want to thank the UN and the UNDP team. Caitlin has put a lot of personal commitment behind this effort. As many of you know, she wraps up an amazing 5-year assignment in Vietnam, and I think this will be one of those legacies that she looks back and says, I was there. So thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Vâng, xin trân trọng cảm ơn.
For the very comprehensive, insightful, and strategic speech. Now I would like to invite Mr. Hậu Alanh, Minister, Chairman of SEMA, to deliver the speech.
Ms. Kenny Wignaraja, UN Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Assistant Administrator, and Regional Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. Ms. Caitlin Wilson, Resident Representative of UNDP Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, representatives of diplomatic agencies in Vietnam, leaders of agencies and ministries representing central organizations. Today, I'm very happy to act on behalf of SEMA to attend this very important event, the launch of our Multidimensional Poverty Report 2021, co-organized by UNDP and our central agencies. First of all, I would like to extend to UNDP Vietnam and especially Ms. Kenny Wignaraja and Ms. Caitlin Wilson and the officers of UNDP Vietnam, a warm welcome, greetings, and a sincere thanks to the support provided by UNDP Global and UNDP Vietnam, in particular to the Vietnamese government and to SEMA in designing and implementing sustainable poverty reduction targeted at the ethnic minority people in the recent years. We are very happy to access the Multidimensional Poverty Report, and we're honored to join this launch. Well, the multidimensional poverty concept was introduced in the early 2000s, and the Vietnamese government took very rapid actions to incorporate this concept in our policies, resolution of the party, and decisions of the Prime Minister. In the fifth Party Congress of the 11th terms back in 2012, the Central Party Committee set out very important solutions focusing on social protection, jobs, and also social assistance for the vulnerable populations, ethnic minority people, ensuring a minimum level of income and access to basic social services, including healthcare, education, essential services, including housing, clean water, information and communication, and other important areas as well. Also, in this aspect, the Vietnamese National Assembly in its 7th Congress, 13th term, issued Resolution 76 on strengthening the implementation of sustainable poverty reduction goals until 2030, including a development of the new poverty line, which incorporate the multidimensional poverty concept and ensuring access to basic social services for the people. Given that in 2015, we have Decision 1614 approving the transitioning from single-dimensional poverty line to multidimensional poverty line and adopting this for period 2016-2020. And the government of Vietnam issued Decree 07-2021 approving the continued adoption of multidimensional poverty lines with the addition of many different indicators or criteria with new approaches as well, and this serve as a basis for policy making. The adoption of poverty dimensional approach has helped significantly in the designing, implementation, and measurement of the success of poverty reduction policies and programs in Vietnam in the recent time, and especially those targeted at ethnic minority people. Thanks to these policies, the standard of living and basic infrastructure in the ethnic minority areas have been invested further to improve the standard of living, education, healthcare, and even cultural lives of ethnic minority peoples, and contribution to the preservation of traditional values and increase longevity. While the multidimensional poverty reports prepared jointly by Undp Vietnam throughout different phases in different years show an evident decline in the poverty rate across Vietnam sustainably. However, for the especially disadvantaged areas such as ethnic minority people areas, I have to be honest with you that in Vietnam, while ethnic minority people accounts for about 14.7% of the total population, they live in disadvantaged areas, areas that account for 3/4 of Vietnam's total land area. However, these are the most disadvantaged areas with a high degree of forestation, with significant potentials for development and growth actually, but they are disadvantaged in terms of geographical separation. And secondly, there is an uneven level of awareness, approaches, and utilization of resources and investment from the public and private sector, which hinders their exploitation of potentials. And also, they are especially prone to the impact of climate change and unprecedented risks, such as the recent pandemic of COVID-19. So the pandemic heavily affected the lives of people across the globe in Vietnam, but it is especially hard on ethnic minority people. There have been job losses, disruption of access to market, and loss of income, which has led to a sharp rise in the poverty rate and poverty relapse rate. Climate change has affected most heavily the 3 regions of Vietnam, the northeastern part of Vietnam, including soil erosion and flash floods, and damaging to infrastructure as well. So just after a flood or a heavy storm, all of the infrastructure that has been invested with funding from the Vietnamese government and international partners and the private community can be destroyed. And climate conditions have become unpredictable. There can be extreme weather event, heavy heat snap or cold snap. And this has led to job losses or income reduction or losses as well, making the life even harder for the people here. And as I mentioned before, due to the limited awareness and lack of access to opportunities, regardless of the significant attention paid by the Vietnamese government, and they have not been able to tap into all of these opportunities. And through these many years, regardless of the multiple poverty reduction programs and policies, many people in these areas still lack basic social services, and many issues remain to be addressed in the coming time. In the 2021 Multidimensional Poverty Report, and throughout the research process, we have seen that UNDP and other research partners have spent a thorough amount of effort in this area, and they will serve as an important piece of reference for the policy makers of Vietnam in our policy making. It also aligns with the resolution number 88 of the National Assembly of Vietnam approving the NTP CDMR program with 10 component projects, 14 sub-projects, and 36 policies designed in this NTP CDMR program. And in this program, the National Assembly and the government of Vietnam have two other NTPs, including the New Rural Development Program NTP and the Sustainable Poverty Reduction NTP for period 2021 to 2030 to address the most difficult issues faced by the disadvantaged populations, including the ethnic minority people and those living in mountainous areas, with policies to improve access. In the recent time, COVID-19 has pulled back our significant poverty reduction and growth progresses, and the NTPs have touched upon this. COVID-19 started late in 2019, and now when developing NTPs, we have not reflected all of the impacts of COVID-19 on our programs. And the government of Vietnam is still trying hard to address those impacts. However, what we have seen is that the approaches adopted and the development of multidimensional poverty policies will require other independent research and studies in different aspects. That is why we believe that the Multidimensional Poverty Report 2021, led by UNDP, is expected to point out the fundamental issues and the key challenges faced by the ethnic minority people communities in particular, and the entire Vietnam population in general. So I hope that this will help us with our policy making process and also help improve the design of our existing NTPs in the coming time. And ladies and gentlemen, apart from the advantages and disadvantages, the pros and cons that have been pointed out in the MDP report, we need to be well aware of the shortcomings in our policy framework that need to be further addressed in the future. And we are committed to work with UNDP and other ministries to propose revisions or adjustments of policy making to the Vietnamese government in this current context when we come under the serious and heavy impact of COVID-19. And regardless of the resources that we have allocated to social protection and poverty reduction, the international support for Vietnam is declining. Both financial support and technical support and other kinds of support from international donors will have an important role to contribute to poverty reduction in Vietnam, especially poverty reduction among the ethnic minority and mountainous areas. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm very honored to act on behalf of SEMA to work with UNDP and to work with the leader of UNDP Global and UNDP Vietnam and other leaders of Vietnamese agencies to launch this Multidimensional Poverty Report 2021. I hope that after this we will take further steps to look into the findings and further discussion. As mentioned in the opening remark of Ms. Connie Wignaraja, that we have already got enough pilots, we've got many successful lessons, then we should look deeper into the lessons for scaling up. And we should use this as inputs to propose new and more suitable and relevant approaches to multidimensional poverty reduction in the coming time. Well, to conclude this, I would like to extend to the leaders of UNDP, UNDP Vietnam, embassies, and agencies of Vietnam a wish of good health, happiness, and success. And I hope to have you work alongside us to provide more support to the ethnic minority people of Vietnam in the coming time. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Ho A Linh, Minister and Chairman of SEMA. And next, we'd like to invite Mr. Nguyễn Bá Hoan, Vice Minister of Malaysia, to deliver his opening remark as well. Ms. Connie Wignaraja, UN Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Assistant Administrator, and Regional Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, Ms. Kathleen Wiesen, Resident Representative of UNDP Vietnam, Mr. Ho A Linh, a member of the Central Party Committee, Minister, Chairman of SEMA, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm very happy to be able to join this launch of the Multidimensional Poverty Report, jointly organized by UNDP, SEMA, Malaysia, and GSO MPI. On behalf of Malaysia, I'd like to say I highly appreciate the effort put into the report and the launch. Ladies and gentlemen, the Party National Assembly and the people of Vietnam pays particular attention to poverty reduction. This has always been an important and consistent policy in the growth and development of Vietnam. While consistent attention and engagement has been paid, and thanks to the self-sufficiency efforts of the Vietnamese government, we have achieved important successes, including an improved legal framework, and along with other achievements, we have millions of households that have escaped poverty. Many households have medium income level. Many regions have given up their title of especially disadvantaged areas. In 1993, the poverty rate was 58.1%. In 2021, it's only 2.23%. 2020, 2.75%. Vietnam has completed ahead of schedule the millennium goals on poverty reduction, and highly appreciated as a highlight and a success story by the global community. And this reflects the will and the determination of the Party National Assembly and the government and people of Vietnam. These achievements have been made a reality thanks to the support of our international organizations, donors, including UNDP, DFAT, World Bank, UNICEF, FAO, CARE, Oxfam, Australian Embassy, Ireland, and other international organizations working alongside Malaysia. Well, to continue with the poverty reduction efforts, UNDP has worked with Malaysia and VASS and GSO MPI, SEMA, to provide this report. We provide analysis of the different measures for multidimensional poverty reduction in Vietnam. The report provides several recommendations, including productive employment, quality social services, third, social protection, force innovative measures to accelerate effective multidimensional poverty reduction. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vietnamese National Assembly already approved the Sustainable Poverty Reduction Program for period 2021-2025, and also the other action plan to improve the Undp. And we hope that we will be able to collaborate closely with relevant agencies in the implementation. The first one is to implement effectively the National Target Program on Sustainable Poverty Reduction period 2021-2025. And secondly, developing a system of comprehensive policies to provide timely support to poor people and responsive to COVID-19. Third, refine the multidimensional poverty reduction measurement. And fourth, implementing models and projects on poverty reduction to create livelihood that is community-based. And fifth, digitalization. Once again, I would like to thank all of our partners, including and especially UNDP and the Australian Embassy, for your support. I wish you success, happiness, and support, and hope that you will collaborate even closer to Malaysia in the coming time. Thank you very much, Vice Minister Nguyễn Bá Hoan. Ladies and gentlemen, next I would like to invite Dr. Nguyễn Thắng, the first Vice Chairman of the Social Economic Advisory Council, Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, to present the key points of the report. Minister Chairman Ho A Linh, Mr. Nguyễn Bá Hoan, Vice Minister of Malaysia, Ms. Khani Wignaraja, UN Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Assistant Administrator and Regional Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Kathleen Guison, Resident Representative of UNDP Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on behalf of the research team, I would like to present to you the key findings. The research team includes a gentleman from GSO, a few officers from BASS, and we have received significant support from Mr. Nguyễn Tiến Phong, Mr. Đoàn Hữu Minh, Ms. Đỗ Lê Thu Ngọc, and Mr. Jonathan Pincus, and leadership from Ms. Kathleen Guison. Well, before coming here, I was very worried. It is because I was allotted only 15 minutes to talk about a 57-page of report. However, after hearing from Ms. Khani, Minister Ho A Linh, and Vice Minister Nguyễn Bá Hoan, I have felt much more comfortable because most of the important messages in the report have been voiced out in the opening remarks of Ms. Khani Wignaraja, Minister Nguyễn Bá Hoan, and Vice Minister Nguyễn Bá Hoan, and Minister Ho A Linh. So I will not repeat what you have said. And I have made a very thorough presentation, 20 slides. But because a lot of the key messages, or all of the key messages have been mentioned, so I will only mention the other points that have not been mentioned. First, I'm very happy to be able to meet Khani after 20 years. Even after 20 years, she still knows very well about Vietnam, and she's one of the great friends of Vietnam. I have talked to Mr. Nguyễn Tiến Phong and Mr. Jonathan Pincus that it is a big pleasure to meet Khani after 20 years. But Khani, probably you would be shockingly surprised at the successes and achievements Vietnam have made after 20 years. We live in Vietnam on a day-to-day basis, so we are familiarized with all this growth, all this improvement in infrastructure or inclusive growth, etc. So we are familiarized with this in our daily progress. And as Connie mentioned before, the basic infrastructure should include connectivity, including hardware, hard and soft connection, right? 20 years ago, the poverty rate among ethnic minority people was very high, but now it has been reduced significantly, and even after factoring in multidimensional poverty line, we could reduce poverty rate from 20+% to 10+% as well. And also, we have a decline to more than 3 times, from 9% to 3% among the smaller groups. And while Vice Minister Huan and Minister Ling mentioned before already, another thing that we have seen is that ethnic minority people who have benefited significantly from our various policies already, but now thanks to better connectivity and with more developed tourism, like Lao Cai, the hometown of Minister Ho Ah Ling as well, the province benefits significantly from our booming tourism industry. Another thing, I would like to refer to the story of 4 years ago when we prepared the previous multi-dimensional poverty report. Back then, there was a concept that's called hygienic latrine. And it was a bottleneck because the share of people with access to hygienic latrine or sanitary latrine was very small. But now things have improved significantly. Minister Ling and Vice Minister Huan mentioned already about the successes of the new rural development program. Many changes, positive changes, have been made to Vietnam, and especially the rural areas thanks to this Undp. Statistics have also shown that poverty reduction in Vietnam is quite sustainable. Why do I say so? Well, back in 2016, and in this report, you can see that we have 3 phases, 2012 to 2016, 2016 to 2020, and 2020 to 2020 in little part. Back in 2016, for every 10 people, 1 of them is poor. But this has been reduced to half by 2020, and they will not relapse into poverty. Well, we are very proud of this achievement, but there are challenges remain. The challenge is vulnerability, especially in the face of COVID-19. While under social distancing, there are people and groups, for example, who work in the industries that have been hard hit by COVID-19. They have their income reduced or totally lost. And then also, among the ethnic minority people, let's say we have poverty pockets among certain groups of ethnic minority people, like the Hmong and the Dao. The Hmong and the Dao are experiencing significant challenges in poverty reduction. And they are the highlights that I would like to share with you to add to what has been mentioned previously by Minister Ling, by Minister Huan, and Ms. Connie. And as Ms. Connie mentioned before in this report, and also in our effort, we aim at multidimensional poverty reduction everywhere and in every dimension, leaving no one behind. So we want to aim at all dimensions of welfare, and we want to reduce poverty also everywhere, leaving no one behind. That is the goal of the SDG. And regarding the tools to be used, we have our institutions, our policies, and in order to achieve our goals and targets. However, we don't directly hit the targets. We go through different channels to create an impact. And in this report, we mentioned 3 channels of impacts as Ms. Kani mentioned before. First, productive employment. Second, social services. And third, social protection. While productive employment, according to ILO's definition, well, another difference that Ms. Kani may see after 20 years is that now in Vietnam, in 2026, we will step into a period of population aging. 20 years ago, I discussed with Kani and Phong that we have an additional 1.5 million people joining the labor force every year. Back then, we had a young population, and back then, Kani also said that we should make the most of this young generation age in order to strengthen our social protection system to prepare for the population aging process later on. And now we can see very clear signs of population aging. For example, during 2010 to 2014, the growth rate of the labor force was 1.4% per annum. But in recent years, well, those from Molisa here know very well, about 0.2 to 0.3% per year only. And things were even worse during COVID-19 due to objective reasons. Just like elsewhere in the world, many people stay away from the labor force during COVID-19. And well, we have followed the recommendation of the ILO in our calculation, but still it is so evident that we are entering a population aging process. And back then, every year, well, 20 years ago, every year we had about an additional 1.5 million people joining the labor force. And now, while we want to rely on creating productive employment to reduce poverty, and well, with productive employment, we expect that people will earn a sufficient income to live above the poverty line. So that is a channel that we can design policy to influence in order to reduce poverty. In Vietnam, more than 40 million people have escaped poverty thanks to employment growth, and I totally understand the important role of social protection. But in Vietnam, as a developing country, we should rely most on creating productive employment to reduce poverty. And while productive employment means employment that earns a sufficient level of income so that people can live above the poverty line. And the share of people with productive employment is quite high in Vietnam in general, but it is still a challenge among ethnic minority people. The gap has been narrowed, well, with the exception of COVID-19, because we come under a lot of shocks just then. And secondly, well, the second channel here that we would like to mention that our policy can influence to reduce multidimensional poverty is to go through access to basic social services, healthcare, education, access to information, etc. What I would like to emphasize about education, which is very clear in this report, is that we should focus on a life cycle approach. So for any country, a good policy should be one that supports children regardless of the family conditions, right? And this report shows still that the academic performance of children still depends heavily on the family conditions, in particular the level of education of the mother. So if the mother is highly educated, there is a great chance that the child will be more educated as well. And this will lead to an inequality trap or further deepen the inequality trap. So if a child is unfortunately born into a poor family with a little educated mother, then he or she may not have a very bright fate. So Minister Leng and Vice Minister Huan, we should think about how to better provide for these children, provide that they exercise the same efforts they should have the same welfare or benefits or achievements regardless of the family condition. And regardless of the multiple achievements that we have got with poverty reduction and services in ethnic minority areas, still they lack access to healthcare, they lack access to doctors, etc. And in this report, we recommend focusing on grassroots level healthcare network because they are the closest to the poor people. And while the pandemic highlights the remaining issues further, that in the pandemic, people really lack access to the grassroots healthcare network of decent quality. Another issue of Vietnam is the very large informal sector, including workers who are not provided for with official contracts or social protection. And now we have about 70% of the labor force who either perform agricultural jobs or non-agricultural jobs, but still not provided for with social protection. And we have even people working in industries with high exposures and at risk of income loss during COVID-19, like hospitality and tourism, etc. And now we can reach out to them through Zalo Connect. We can support them in different means, but apparently it is not sufficient. I think Zalo Connect is an excellent platform that can help these unfortunate workers to connect to philanthropists. But it is not enough. We need to think more systemically in order to reduce the share of workers without an official contract so that they can be better protected for social protection. And then among these informal workers, many of them are senior already. They don't have too much time until retirement. But if they retire without pension, then the burden of today will be shifted to the future generation. Future generation will have to work to pay for their for the future retirees' pension. And well, in order to reduce the informal size, first we need to improve economic growth, and secondly, we need to build up our human capital. We need to develop their capacity and potentials so that they can seize opportunities to lift them beyond the current situations. And thirdly, we need to reduce the bureaucracy burdens to ensure easier registration by enterprises for easier and more convenient contracting with workers. Also, we should make changes to the way that people can benefit from their pension entitlements. Those are the things that we, Vietnam, should be mindful of. The next point I'd like to mention is social assistance. Well, COVID-19 has pointed out to us that the social protection system of Vietnam is lacking. I have been saying this times and times again in many workshops already. While our social protection system has improved significantly, I'm saying this because Kani is here today. Well, 20 years ago, I often use a metaphor that the social protection system of Vietnam may back then respond to storm of level 3 or level 4. Now it can respond to storms of level 6 or 7, but COVID-19 is a storm of level 12. So we are better to prepare our social protection system to respond to similar storms in the future. And climate change is severe now. There may be extreme storms that will hit ahead of us in the future. So we should build up a social protection system that is strong enough to be able to respond to storms of level 11 or 12. Don't think that it is a black swan. Don't think that it's an event with minimal probability of occurrence, right? And just don't say that in ethnic minority areas we rarely or will not likely have these incidents that we should not or we don't have to prepare for them. And I think, well, we should have a systemic view as well. What's important is how to increase the social insurance coverage. The social protection system can serve as an automatic stabilizer, and then we can factor in other measures, including digitalization, to provide faster cash transfers to our people. And also, we have a series of policy recommendations as well. We want an integrated approach, including productive employment and social protection and social services. Connie mentioned employment, productive employment, economic stability, etc. It's important to prevent inflation rate. We know that SEMA has tried very hard, Malaysia has tried very hard, but there are things that go beyond the scope of these two ministries, like the issue of inflation, for example, and Connie mentioned the importance of global and regional integration as well. In the 21st century, we want to emphasize innovative skills and capacity rather than repetitive skills. We want to have critical thinking skills, extrapolation skills, debate skills, and other digital skills, etc. So it is a different set of skills that is required compared to if you work only as an assembly line worker. And in the field of social protection, we want to increase the coverage and we want to reduce the size of the informal economy, building up the resilience of Vietnam in response to shocks like storms of level 11 or 12 in the future. So the social protection system should not take in the condition of household registration or hưu khẩu. So provided that you are a Vietnamese citizen, you should be able to benefit from the national social protection system, etc. While there are a lot of details in the report, but due to many reasons, the first one is that I'm given only 15 minutes. The more important reason is that our three distinguished co-chairs, Ms. Connie, Minister Ling, and Vice Minister Huan mentioned already. So I would like to speak very briefly, and I'd like to thank our three co-chairs for mentioning the most important points already. Once again, thank you very much, and this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Thắng. So, Mr. Thắng, you hit the nail on the head. Exactly 15 minutes without the need of any notes or any slides. So, this is because you lived and breathed on this report for a year. So thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we are a little bit behind schedule. So we would like to ask for your permission to move straight to the panel discussion. Outside here, we have tea and coffee. So please feel free to go get your tea and coffee, and then we will go straight to our panel discussion. Of Molly, sir, can I please hear shortly from you regarding this report? Maybe 3 minutes for each remark, and then we may receive questions from the floor, and then we can discuss further. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, regarding the MDP report, well, Molly Sar has worked very closely with UNDP and relevant agencies, including CIMAR and GSO. So I believe that after this research and analysis, given our annual MDP report, well, this is a very important effort to take stock of what we have done in poverty reduction, to take stock of the achievements to date, the results that we have got, the remaining issues to be addressed, the directions for the coming year or phase, etc. So in 2021, we worked very closely with UNDP, and we conducted a thorough review and adjustments. And for this report, we have got the consensus of all of those who participated in the drafting of this report. While we may care about many different aspects of the MDP, however, in 2021, we focus on some of the key issues that I should emphasize here, especially productive employment, basic social services, and social protection system. This is crucial for the poor, especially under COVID-19. And I think highly of the analysis, the findings and recommendations of the 2021 MDP report. Thank you very much, Mr. Tô Đức. And next, Mr. Hà Việt Quân, Director General and Chief of the NTP CDMA office. So can we hear from you, Mr. Quân? Thank you. And while I had the opportunity to work since very early on with the experts for the drafting of this report. Mr. Tô Đức mentioned this process already, so I will not repeat his words. From CIMAR and the coordination office, and after the announcement of this report, what has made us very happy is that, once again, this report is a confirmation that we have correctly identified the issues faced by ethnic minority peoples. And this has been reflected in their design, which is known by many of my colleagues here, from our development partners, from embassies, and from other research institutions, in order to design an NTP that focuses on addressing the issues that have been pointed out in this MDP report. So this is a validation that government agencies, especially with their relevant support, that we have come up with an important NTP CDMR. And let me make it clear that among the 10 projects, 14 sub-projects, and 36 policies, they are direct interventions to different areas that were pointed out by the report. So I'm very happy that the report is a validation of the design for this NTP CDMR. That is my first remark, and let's now give time to others. Thank you very much, Mr. Quân. And Mr. Jonathan Pinkhurst, please, our senior economic expert of UNDP Vietnam. So Jonathan Pinkhurst joined with the research teams from the very beginning.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to join everyone congratulating the team on the report, and particularly congratulate Vietnam on continued progress towards poverty reduction, particularly in all its dimensions. I think one of the issues that we grapple with that I'd like to highlight this morning that perhaps hasn't been mentioned yet is that Vietnam is a very different country than it was in the early 1990s when the first poverty studies were done. At that time, just about everybody was either in self-employment, in agriculture, or in petty trade, handicrafts, or working for the government. Basically, there were two groups of employees in the labor market. Now, of course, today, Vietnam is a much more modern economy, and about 55% of the labor force is salaried or waged employed. So from a typical, very low-income developing country of in the early 1990s, when maybe 15% of the labor force was working for wages, now more than half of the labor force is working for wages, which is a very different kind of economy, which requires different kinds of poverty reduction strategies. And one of the reasons why the move to multidimensional poverty is so important is because it includes the discussion about productive employment, which is so very much important, and which Nguyen Thang was talking about earlier. But I think it also raises another dimension of poverty, which is wages. And this is quite sensitive, of course, because one of Vietnam's, one of the strong bases of success for Vietnam is the fact that it's been able to attract a lot of foreign direct investment, which is partly attracted by competitive wages, relatively low wages measured in international terms, right? So as Vietnam becomes a middle-income country, as it moves to becoming an upper middle-income country in the next decade, this question about wages and poverty will become more important. And I'd like to highlight one particular aspect of that, which is the gender wage gap. And this is an area which is policy relevant, which I think that Vietnam can make great progress moving forward with some more directed policy in this area. So if we look, we congratulate Vietnam on a very high, now it's smaller than in Indonesia and India, for example, in the region, much smaller, in sectors like manufacturing and agriculture. But in manufacturing, which is a very important sector for Vietnam, the gender wage gap, using data from ILO, in manufacturing, the gender wage gap in Vietnam is currently around 16%. So women make on average 16% less than men in manufacturing. Again, lower than Indonesia, which is 27%, but higher than Thailand, which is 14%, and the Philippines, which is 7%. Now, there are many causes of this. There isn't a single cause. Discrimination is part of it. Gender division of labor is part of it. Women are crowded into lower paying jobs. Men have more occupational choice, and some of those choices are higher waged jobs. But there are other reasons as well, and policy can be an effective way of closing the gender wage gap, and I think that's important. We don't have time to go into that now, but that's an important discussion for the future as we approach this question of poverty in Vietnam in the years to come. Thank you.
Vâng, cảm ơn anh Jonathan đã đưa ra.
The Với tiền lương. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for mentioning an aspect that has not been touched upon significantly in this report, that is the gender wage gap in productive employment. So maybe this can be a new direction for our research in the following reports. And in the remaining time of this panel discussion, I would like to involve our online and on-site participants as well. So if you have any questions, well, could you please go ahead, and we'd like to pass the mic on to you. Hello, everyone. My name is Hương, and I'm in charge of policy research at CARE International Vietnam. I don't have any question, but I have a comment to follow from what Jonathan mentioned before. I totally agreed with you that in this report, we did not touch too much upon the gender wage gap. However, according to the experience of CARE in the last 30 years working alongside poverty reduction programs in Vietnam, I'm very impressed that in the report we pointed out one of the root causes to the inequality, that is unpaid care. And it is a new point and very impressive in this report. In our joint research between CAF and CARE, we talked about unpaid care as well. If we can address the issue of unpaid care, we can release 1/3 of the labor force among ethnic minority people in the deep poverty pockets. And also, if we can address the issue of unpaid care, we can improve the labor productivity of women as well. In our research into Lai Châu and Hà Giang ethnic minority areas, well, we found out that women spend a lot of available time on unpaid care. The hours that they spend on unpaid care is about the same amount of hours that men spend on paid work. So we only have 24 hours a day. How can women find out their time to spend on productive employment if they have to spend so much time on unpaid care, let alone to recharge themselves? So if we can address the issue of unpaid care, then women can have more time to rest, to recharge, and to invest in productive employment, etc. And with the experience of CARE, we believe that if we can focus on the really issues of substance, then we can ensure substance in our poverty reduction journey in the coming time. And we are willing to work alongside government agencies in this process. Thank you very much, Huang. So the issue of unpaid care is quite a concern, and other countries across the globe are looking further into this issue to design relevant support policies to release women out of this burden. And well, maybe we can look further into this area in future studies. Mr. Thắng, you want to respond to this? Well, first, this report is a summary version of a full report. And in the full report, we talk very concretely about the gender gap in the labor force. First of all, gender gap in labor force participation rate, women participate less than men, and we have 55% of the labor force being wage earners, etc. And the gender gap has been narrowed down. And thirdly, we talk about unpaid care and gender gap, etc. And I believe that here there is some interaction between paid work and unpaid work. So when workers overwork in unpaid duties at home, then there will be fewer opportunities for them to participate in paid work. And then if women are underpaid in the labor force, then that will lead to their overwork at home as well. Well, obviously, a report cannot touch upon everything. So I have a few points to respond to Carol's comment. Well, I think to release women of their home duty burden, we can provide more creches and kindergartens, well, to help with the house chores. Secondly, we need a change of social norms. As societies develop further, well, we talk about the equal division of roles among men and women at home and in the labor force as well. Another thing we have to be aware of is that now we have a very tight labor market, and there is a labor shortage in the labor force following COVID-19. And now women workers, especially migrant workers, while previously they may have agreed to leave their children at home to the grandparents, but now they bring their children along, and that is why they need to have kindergartens to look after the children when they go to work. So we need to have a whole set of solutions and measures rather than a single one. Thank you very much, Mr. Tang. And other people, please. Hello, everyone. Panelists, my name is Dat from Remark. And previously, Mr. Tang said that the social protection system of Vietnam should be resilient enough to respond well to storms of level 11 and 12. So my question is, what solutions do the governments need to be able to be that resilient, and what is the role of the private sector? This is a question to all of the panelists rather than just Mr. Tang. Okay, so Mr. Quân, could you please speak first? Okay, thank you very much. Very good question, as I mentioned before. So this report, for us policymakers, it is like a medical record that can help point out the issues or the risks of health, so that we can better diagnose the health of the areas that we care about. So, well, maybe we need to find good vaccines, good treatments. And Mr. Tang mentioned the need for holistic solutions, right? So a single solution will not be effective because the findings here, well, we talk about three different areas, right? Productive employment, social protection, and social services, etc. But in the full report, we cover about 15, not 3. The thing is, we need a whole set of policies rather than just one policy. And then in this whole set of policies, they should be adaptive. For example, for social economic development for ethnic minority and mountainous areas, to date, we often categorize them into a very simple taxonomy. For example, ethnic minority versus skin people, mountainous area versus delta area. But among ethnic minority people, we have 54 groups. So ethnic minority is not a homogeneous group. And ethnic minority or mountainous people in Lâm Đồng may be different from those in Sơn La, etc., right? So the policies should reflect the cultural differences, the socio-economic differences, the natural geographical condition differences, etc. So our policies need to be both comprehensive and flexible in order to be tailored for the poorest ethnic minority people. We use the concept of poverty pockets, right? And yeah, we should pay more attention to this. And another thing is that for us, the authorities and policymakers, we realize that we need to have more concrete studies in order to come up with concrete policy solutions to be really impactful, like you mentioned before. You talk about the roles of the government, the role of the private sector, of the entire society in addressing the common issues of poverty reduction, sustainable poverty reduction in ethnic minority and mountainous areas. Wow, I'm very happy that in this report we point out the issues that were mentioned in the design of our program. And Miss Judy from the World Bank, who was sitting down there, had a field visit with me in the design. And while we talk about the issues of employment, access to public services for ethnic minority and mountainous people, etc., but the issue is much more complex. We may have public services there, but is access really possible? We have schools, but can people really have a proper road to get to the school? Well, we have a health clinic there, but in case of sickness, can they get to the clinic? Well, do they live too far away from the clinic? Is that too difficult to get there, etc.? So there are the issues as well that we need to address. Well, there are many other elements that can access the level of access or utilization of public services. Or just now we talk about informal employment. Well, table 31 in the full report, there was an analysis of informal employment. And we can see that, well, over certain periods, even decades, the structure of informal employment has not changed much. We talk about solutions including provision of schools, kindergartens, etc., but we need infrastructure solutions as well, including training, including communication, etc. Well, I want to keep it short that we have identified the problems, but the thing is how to address them. We need the involvement of many different relevant stakeholders, and it's very fortunate for our NTP CDMA program that right from the design phase we have involved everyone, UNDP, CARE, Australia, etc., and the World Bank, everyone was involved. And we have contributed very positively, actively on the technical side in order to have a good design for the program. And in the implementation phase, in the policy making phase, we really hope to have all of your involvement, especially from researchers and scientists. So yes, that is a message that we would like to send out from SEMA. Thank you very much, Mr. Quân. And Mr. Đức, please, from the perspective of the Poverty Reduction Office, well, in terms of policy making, what should we note more about? Well, regarding poverty reduction, we have a few groups of solutions in order to support the poor and the population in general. First of all, we have a system of regular poverty reduction measures, including unemployment, healthcare, education, housing, clean water, and information. And also, we have a system of social assistance. So, at any time and anywhere, the government always has a line of budget to support the poor and our people in general. Also, the National Assembly has approved a national targeted program on sustainable poverty development, sustainable poverty reduction. And the program provides targeted support to certain poverty areas and certain poverty groups, including poor districts and especially disadvantaged groups and areas, infrastructure development, improvement of living standards, etc., implementing poverty reduction programs and projects to create livelihoods and improve income for the local people, vocational training, job matching, housing support, nutritional support, etc., very concrete measures. And apart from the regular policy support and the NTP, but in cases where people suffer from extreme events like COVID-19, for example, the government and the central and local governments have deployed social protection measures in a timely manner to support people affected by COVID-19, to add to the existing support such as cash grant, for example, that the other two programs have not covered, or food support, or support to the students from poor households, including internet access and computer equipment for distant learning, etc. So we provide a diverse range of support to the poor and our people in general. And you have a question about the role of the private sector. Well, this is a new point in poverty reduction, and one of the focal points actually that we are trying to promote in our NTP on SPD in 2021-2025. So we are proposing for the government to issue a decree on the management mechanisms for all NTPs, including an entity, including a group of entity to be involved in poverty reduction, including enterprises or cooperatives or households, etc., or communities. However, according to the new NTP, we don't provide individual household support. We support poor households through poverty reduction projects and through different production models, etc. And in the latter, the private sector plays a very important role. Thank you very much, Mr. Đức. And is there any other participants who would like to ask more or comment more? Hello, everyone. My name is Tuấn from the Green Development Support Center, and we work in livelihood development support for ethnic minority people. I have two questions. The first one to Dr. Nguyễn Thắng. In section 4, you talked about the solutions, including innovative solutions. So can you provide a summary of some of the innovative solutions that have been adopted and recognized? The second question is dedicated to Mr. Quân. So once you have adopted the poverty, multi-dimensional poverty line, which is a higher line, so how does that affect the NTP CDMA? Two questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Tuấn. Well, we have a limited amount of time only. So, Ms. Nhan, can you just ask a question, and then we have our panelists to respond to you? Hello, everyone. My name is Nhan. I'm from CARE International. I don't have a question, but I would like to share a comment. So in period 2019-2020, when we took stock of the 2016-2020 poverty reduction program, and the government intended to add another dimension of poverty, that is employment poverty. But the argument then subsided. And today we mentioned the importance of paid work versus unpaid work. And I wonder if the Office of Poverty Reduction, GSO, and other partners, can we continue to look into the option of including employment poverty into our multidimensional poverty measurement? Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, so you asked about OTP, you asked about innovative, right? So it is related to the previous discussion with Mr. Quân. I myself was tasked by Mr. Quân to work on this, and Mr. Quân has a lot of enthusiasm in involving the private sector in helping ethnic minority people. He even involved his friends as well. I was very impressed with his dedication and enthusiasm in promoting the role of the private sector in poverty reduction. Previously, we provided cash grants to the poor, but now we involve private sector as well. And probably these models should be scaled up. And there are other innovative models and success stories as well. Mr. Tô Đức and Mr. Quân knows more about this than me. And before I mentioned that we should build up resilience to respond to storms of levels 11 and 12, right? And the thing is, why we need to respond to strong storms, heavy storms like that? In order to do so, we need to have a good financial buffers at the household level and at the national level as well. The two gentlemen talked about the social protection buffer already. And let me talk about financial buffer at the household level and the involvement of the private sector. The labor market is very tight, and we are now in a population aging process. So we need to create productive and good employment so that people can create a good financial buffer for themselves. And we have a sharp rise of the middle class in the recent time. A sharp rise from 7+% back then to more than 20% in 2020. So after COVID-19 is nearly over, people rush to tourism and other consumption. So I think if the private sector can if the private sector role can be further promoted to expand the middle class of Vietnam, then we can even be more equipped to respond to heavy storms. Thank you very much, Mr. Thắng. Because before Mr. Quân responds, there is another question about given that the poverty line has been upgraded to MTP, so what does this affect? How does this affect the economic growth model of Vietnam? So, Mr. Quân, can you respond first, and then Mr. Jonathan Pincus? So, regarding the MTP line. It is quite a complex question. I cannot respond immediately. However, let me return to the NTP CDMA. But in the previous phase, we had about 20 years implementing Program 135. Based on a targeting approach of categorizing ethnic minority areas into different levels of development. In the early 2000s, with the technical support from development partners, we approached this categorization not only based on poverty lines, but we rely on deprivations in terms of infrastructure, services, and percentages of school attendance or other elements as well, not just the single poverty rate. So the adoption of the multidimensional poverty line in this period is good for us in policy making and designs in order to better identify the deprivations among certain communities or groups. That is why within our NTP for period 2021-2030, we have designed a system of solutions within the NTP, which is quite inclusive, with 10 projects and 14 sub-projects covering all aspects of social economic life, including social protection, training, private sector economy, as Mr. Thắng mentioned before. So Mr. Thắng shared that for the NTP CDMR in particular, or other social economic development programs in general, our approach, even from the previous phase, is not only to involve the private sector to support the poor, but also we encourage private sector economic development among ethnic minority people as well, including entrepreneurship, business startups among ethnic minority people to create productive employment, create livelihood, or support their access to market in general. So I believe that this approach is very important in implementing our policies. And between Mr. Thắng and myself, we often discuss that it is important to identify where the locomotive is in this train. In the previous phase, we focused heavily on the last carriages, those who are vulnerable, those who are poor. But in this phase, apart from supporting them, we should slowly, gradually transition to relying on social protection policies to support them, while also supporting further to the locomotives, those which can create a drive which acts like engine to pull out the other carriages. So we should build upon the existing strengths of ethnic minority people to support those who know how to do business, even the rich households. If they know how to do business and they can lift out their households out of poverty in order to be really sustainable, rather than supporting only the poor. So that is our approach, and that is my personal perspective, that if we want to support the poor, we should support also the rich who are capable of lifting the poor out of poverty, rather than just supporting the poor. That's it for me. Thank you. Mr. Tô Đức, anything from you? Well, let's talk a little bit about the poverty line. And let me add a little bit to this. In period 2016-2020, Vietnam adopted the MDP, multi-dimensional poverty line already. And we had two lines. One line is income poverty. Another line is MDP, including deprivation of basic social services as well. So with the two lines, we have two groups of poor households. One that suffers from income poverty, and the other one is those that suffer from MDP poverty. And there are differences about the poverty rates among these two approaches. For the previous or the old lines, they are about 70% of the baseline minimum living standard early 2016. And at the end of the period, we measure up to 45% of the baseline. So in fact, the line was too low. And that is why at the end of the period, people measure up to only 45% of the minimum living standard, while they were up to 70% of the living standard, of the baseline living standard at the early phase. And there have been significant effort of the Vietnamese government under the impact of COVID-19. And to achieve the minimum living standard at the first year of the phase, like from 2021, etc. It requires a lot of effort, and in the world there are very few countries that can achieve this minimum living standard right from the beginning. And then among other countries, they have added unemployment deprivation dimension as well. That is a sixth dimension. So we have education, healthcare, housing, clean water information, right? And we have 12 indicators in Vietnam. In our new line, we have an indicator for income poverty, which is the same between poor and near poor households. It's 2 million for urban households and 1.5 million for rural households. And 5 cities and provinces of Vietnam have issued their own poverty lines. Some may lift the 2 million to 2.5, etc. And 4 other provinces are now developing their own poverty lines for approval. It is important because the living standards in different cities vary. For example, Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi may have different living standards versus those in Bắc Cạn, Hà Giang, etc. So we believe that the cities or provinces with high socio-economic conditions should have higher poverty lines too. And this is also one of the focal points in the design of the Undp on poverty reduction for period 2021-2025. So it is important to identify the existing deprivations suffered by the poor to have a more comprehensive reflection of the different aspects of poverty rather than just income poverty. And we believe that we should first address the aspect of employment services deprivation. And that is why our program sets out one of the goals to be for each of the poor household should have at least one household members about 25 years old to have stable jobs. This is an ambitious goal because, well, the resources required to ensure this level of employment is significant. But we should set this out as a goal or even target for the necessary efforts by all local provinces and cities. To do this, we need to focus on vocational skills training and other measures to support sustainable employment. And these have been incorporated into our projects and sub-projects to provide employment, to create employment for our people. Another thing is to support production development to create livelihood and jobs for people. And this is the focus of our program in 2021-2025. Thank you very much, Mr. Đức. One question, and let me repeat this question to Mr. Jonathan Pinkers regarding the upgrading of the MDP line. How does this affect, or whether this has any impact on the development, economic development model of Vietnam, economic growth model?
Well, I think the most obvious impact is that with the increase in the line and the increased coverage, there is scope for additional funding and broader reach of the existing programs and adding new programs to reach a broader population. And I think this is very important as we look to the future, and we need to consider three important factors that are brought out in the report. The first is, of course, natural disasters, the lessons of the pandemic, and weather-related disasters that will be coming more frequently and with greater intensity in the years to come. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The second, I think, is related, which is the energy transition. So in the future, Vietnam has made a commitment of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And over time, that will entail a change of production systems, of quite a lot about transportation, industry, agriculture, that will affect ethnic minority regions and every other region of Vietnam. And the third is mobility, which Dr. Tang was talking about earlier, the importance of migration. And migration will increase. I mean, it will not decrease in the face of these economic, social, and ecological challenges that we're now facing. So, you know, we don't know, we don't have really comprehensive statistics, but we think that about 14% of the population are migrants of one form or another, temporary or long-term, and that will probably increase. And the increase in migration will have an important impact on not just living standards and employment, but also on anti-poverty programs. Because as Dr. Tang said earlier, we need to move to a system of social assistance based on citizenship rather than based on location. And this is part of the government's master plan for social assistance reform, which was already approved in 2017, and we need to move in that direction more quickly to ensure that people have access to social assistance regardless of where they live. As they are all citizens of Vietnam, everyone is entitled to equal protection, social protection, access to social protection systems. Thanks.
Xin cảm ơn anh ạ. Xin
Mr. Jonathan Pinkers. And we have a last question, please, by one of the participants here. Well, my name is Hai from the Institute of Development Strategies, MPI. I'm very happy to be here to participate in the launch of our MDP report. Well, in the summary report, I have seen many aspects that touch upon job and employment. And just now, Dr. Nguyễn Thắng talked about population aging in Vietnam. And in our report, in various studies, including those by UNFPA, they mentioned that Vietnam would be among the 5 fastest population aging countries. And by 2035, it is projected that we will achieve the age population status. Well, I wonder if in our next MDP report, maybe the drafting team can also talk more about elderly people in Vietnam, because, well, the senior citizens in Vietnam, senior citizens in Vietnam are taking informal employment, especially in the rural areas, and they are among the vulnerable populations that we should care about. So we should recognize this in our report in order to design more relevant perspectives. So once again, I would like to thank you all to our panelists for joining today. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that the launch today and the report launched today is useful to you, providing you with useful information on multidimensional poverty. We hope that this can be a useful piece of reference to Melissa. I would like to thank all of our experts and participants from the Office of Poverty Reduction, from the Coordination Office of the Undp CDMA, and all of the distinguished guests and participants for joining in the launch. I would like to thank Dr. Nguyễn Thắng and his team for drafting and providing a very detailed analysis in the report. We have a soft version of the report that is downloadable from UNDP website, and also we have a Vietnamese and English version as well. If you don't already have a hard copy, once again, we would like to thank you for joining us. We would like to thank our donors from the GREAT project. I'm not quite sure if they are still here. And thank you very much for supporting financially to make this report possible. Thank you very much to all.